Hi students, it's Arthur, and now we're moving on to the second video in the interview series. And in this one, we're going to explore research and preparation in detail for this video. What we're going to do is we're going to discuss the proper research areas, using technology in your research, and then closing out with an understanding of the psychology behind those interview questions, which we're all so afraid of. We're going to then start to demystify those fears, break through some myths, and then get you ready to answer some tough interview questions in the next video. So technology is more and more prevalent as a tool for interview preparation. Basically, these tools allow us to go through this process more accurately and faster, including the use of video to record and analyze our performance. And we really want you to use these tools to their maximum benefit to help you manage this important focal point of the whole job search process. So we can use research and we can grab information off the web. We can use generative AI and the solutions that we've talked about before, such as ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and Copilot. And then we can use these tools also to help us develop potential interview questions that we may get, how to answer those questions, creating a list of interview questions for our hiring team, and then we can actually practice our interviews. First of all, we should use the mock interview process and our mentoring resources for these kinds of things. But absent that, we can go to the Career Success Center, or we can actually start and use some of these tools like Udemy and Big Interview to actually go through this process. But let's kind of take a step back and let's talk about interviewing in general. So the types of interviews that you're going to face should be in one of these basic categories. And they'll be very dependent on the organization, the size of the organization, the type of role that you have and its place in the business, and the specific requirements of that role, how technically challenging it is, if it needs certifications, or if it's a more entry-level job where it's more general and you'll learn those skills on the fly. One of the types of interviews you'll get in the interview process, of course, is the screening interview. And that's going to be either by phone or video typically. We also have candidate assessment tests that are used to basically check to see if the qualifications that are required for the job are present in you. Sometimes we'll also have asynchronous video interviews. Basically, we're going to record ourselves answering questions. Sometimes this will be through an AI or chatbot, or they may be scripted questions that you're just going to have to answer one after the other. Of course, then we have the more traditional methods of interviewing, the phone interview, the video, and the in-person interview. And we'll talk through all of these in one way, shape, or form. But in essence, you need to know that preparation is going to be the same for all of this. The depth of preparation might be slightly different depending on where you are. However, I wouldn't recommend making that a criteria for how much you do research. I would rather go in over-prepared every single time than be under-prepared once. So when we start to think about being ready for the interview, I want you to get out of your head that you were going to be interviewing in a phone, video, or in person. And I want you to remember that every interaction with the company is an interview. However, preparation is going to be the answer to most interviewing concerns and interview questions. If you're ready and you've done your research and you understand the requirements for the role, even the toughest questions will be far, far easier to answer if you're ready. And preparation, as I said, is going to be nearly identical in each format, no matter what we do. The only thing that might be different is you're going to be your appearance. It might be a little bit different, but even then, we suggest you get dressed up, even if it's a phone interview. But the research, your answer preparation and delivery, and the end of interview questions, they're all going to be very similar, although you may want to make sure that you're not giving the same answer each time and that you're not asking the same interview questions at the end of the interview every single time as well. You need to shake that up. You need to use the information from the interviews to add or supplement to your questions and use your active listening skills to create interesting questions and interesting answers that are very relevant to your audience at that particular point in time. And the best way to do this is to practice, using the tools that we've talked about, using the resources that we've mentioned. And then, of course, remember, every interaction with the company is an interview. Even if you're scheduling your interview with a receptionist, or the recruiter, or you're actually coming into a site and you're meeting the receptionist for the first time, how you treat that receptionist could have an impact on your overall feedback for your interview. So once we get into the interview mindset, these are the kind of things that we're going to want to answer. Those are kind of the questions we want to prepare for the interview. Do you understand the job description? Do you understand the purpose of the business? And honestly, the purpose of most businesses, save for the nonprofits, is to make money. And even the nonprofits, they need to make money to serve their constituents. So making money, being profitable, depending on whatever that definition is important. But not all companies get there in the same way. So learning about the products and the culture that they have in the business is important. Are you passionate about all of those things? Can you explain how your skills can translate to the success of the business? Have you researched the people that you're going to interact with? Are you able to build rapport based on that research? Ask great questions based on what you know about them and the company. Have you written down and can you easily describe your accomplishments, both in terms of fact-based answers, short answers, but also a story when you're answering the questions, demonstrating those skills in context, where you're talking about a situation, how you dealt with it, and what the results were. And then finally, do you have a list of questions for the end of the interview that are based on what you know and what you've learned during the interview process? Well, how do you find the information? Well, basically, you can use the typical information that you could always use using Google search and the company websites and things of that sort, plus a few resources dedicated to this kind of information. When we go looking at the company website, we want to find out about the company, the size, the scope, locations, the structure, what their ownership structure looks like. We want to make sure we understand what their products or services are and the technology they use to make it. So in other words, what do they make? How do they make it? Who do they sell it to? Where do they sell it? What's their competitive advantage? In other words, why do firms buy from them? If you're in supply chain, you also may want to know who their suppliers are. Ultimately, we want to understand the financial status of the organization. Private firms can be tough to find information on. We want to know the trends, though. Is it going up? Is it going down? Are there any special circumstances that have impacted their profitability? Ultimately, we want to work with companies whose trend is moving up, not down, who's in a growing market, not a declining market. Although those companies, you can find very successful careers, you need to think about what the upside is and what the long-term view of that organization is. Obviously, LinkedIn is a great resource. You can but you can research and then potentially interview, informational interviews and things like that with people in those organizations and the roles that you're interested in or in the departments that you're interested in. Of course, you can use Google and generative AI products to do research on the news. You can check their reputation through Glassdoor and other similar websites. But you need to make sure you take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. As most of you know, most of the people that complain on the internet are not, they're the ones whose voice you typically hear. So by and large, the feedback will be tilting towards the negative tendency, even for some of the more positive companies. And then, of course, one of the most important things you can do overall is to actually speak to people in those organizations who are either there now or who have been there in the past. Do some informational interviewing. Build your professional network with some people in those organizations and ask questions. How do you like working there? How did you start your role? What's been the most interesting things you found there? What's been the most frustrating things you found there? Questions like that can lead you to insight that you wouldn't otherwise get. So when we start talking about the organization themselves, what we really want to do is we want to categorize some of these areas of research. One of those is going to be, what do they stand for? Another one might be how they fit your needs. Now, these questions are pretty general in nature, so what you may want to find out about an organization may be very heavily weighted in one of these categories or one of these bullet points. So all of these will be unique to you and what you want out of it. So make sure you go through the marketing plan, know what you want out of a job, and you're asking the right questions. You're not just asking questions, but you're asking your questions to get the answers you need to make the best decision for yourself. So things like mission and values, what the organizational structure's like, the products and services they have. Do they support diversity, equity, and inclusion, which might be very important for some of us? How do they then fit your needs? Is the size of an organization what you're looking for? Do you want to work for a large multinational or a small mom and pop company? Is working on site important, or would you rather work remotely? How are you going to work with and interact with other departments that are your stakeholders, or you're a stakeholder of them. Also, what are they known for? We talked about the large multinational. Do you want a company that's local, national, or international? You want to know who the competitors and the landscape of the industry and their markets. And you also want to know what's going on in the company and in their markets as well. So as we start doing the research, we need to also understand about the job description too. How does that job aid in the success of the company? Where is it within the company? What the skills and experiences are needed to be successful. And these are things you're going to incorporate in your answers, in your questions, and in your marketing documents as well. And then you need to think about what you've done in the past and how that aligns with all of these key areas. Ultimately, we're going to help use this information to help us understand the firm better, to create more interest for you, hopefully, or you may determine that this isn't the company for you. And that's just as good of information as if it is good enough for you. So ultimately, this information will help us ask more specific and relevant questions that demonstrate our level of interest and enthusiasm for this opportunity. So it's going to give us context, we're going to develop answers and questions, and it's going to hopefully also build our connections to help build rapport and our network. So for us, one of the things that we may want to do is think about an example. So I've got a couple of agenda examples here. So if we're interviewing, for instance, for a financial analyst position for a financial services provider, what we may want to do is think about how to present ourselves in the interview process. And so for this kind of a role, we may want to think about these kinds of things. Think about your top skills and how they fit into the organization and how we can use data to tell a story that influences strategy and decision making. We may find that strong communication and presentation skills are needed. And we need to be comfortable sharing our ideas and opinions in group settings and be able to tell a story on that. Data visualization may be important, and our research may tell us this. And then we need to be able to explain how we're able to transform numbers into visuals and usable information for the organization. And then, of course, we may want to talk also about our ability to, our success in our academic endeavors and how we got an A in our capstone course. A sales position would look in a very similar way, but may have some different points of view. We talk about our sales experience, our part-time jobs, our internships, how we're very competitive and driven to succeed. Maybe we're a college athlete, or maybe we're involved in competitions and we've been actively engaged in sales competitions, both internally and externally, and maybe we've won or been a finalist in those competitions. We may find that this company is focusing on renewable energy, and we may have a passion about that. It may even have been a subject in our senior marketing project, for example. And then we can highlight our engagement, our involvement in the university and its activities, or our volunteer activities where we're able to take leadership positions of roles that might be very relevant to what we're interviewing for. So being able to kind of connect the dots and understanding what our research is going to tell us, and then how we fit in and how we can demonstrate that information and how our experiences fit and how we align with that role. So all of this is going to come together, and it's going to help us create that kind of agenda what we'll set up for ourselves prior to going into the interview. Next area is we're going to start to talk about is the types of interview questions that you'll face through the interview process. So we have different types of interviews, and now we're going to talk about different types of questions. It's important to remember that all interview questions are designed to determine your fit in the organization in terms of your technical capabilities. That means how and if you can do the job, and your cultural fit, how well you will fit in with the culture and style of work in our workplace, particularly from the viewpoint of the hiring manager and the others that you will be interviewing with. So you always need to be thinking about the perspective of the person asking the question and what they are looking for. Remember, it's about them. Ultimately, it's about your fit in the organization. If you're at this phase in the interview process, you are qualified for the role. Companies don't bring in to talk to people that they don't think is qualified. Your job now is to prove that you're the best fit for the organization, and that your technical skills and your personality and attributes make you the perfect, well-rounded individual that's going to fit in very well in their organization. Not in the company, their part of the organization. So as we go through these types of questions, let's go through them kind of one by one. First of all are the personality assessment questions. Usually these are not very specific to a role, depending on the role, of course, but they attempt to get to know how you will fit in the organization. And these are questions like, tell me about yourself. What are you passionate about? What do you consider your greatest achievement? Why do you want to work here? These are questions that are going to determine your fit and how you feel about the role and whether or not you're enthusiastic about working for the organization and the position that you're interviewing for. Once we sort of identify that, now we're going to check in and check your abilities and validate that. So we're going to be looking probably mostly at the technical skills that you've got. So software programs you're proficient in, the experience you have in the field, 3 skills that you can use to add value, might be your foreign language ability. We might ask you if you're in a sales role to sell me your pen to see what your abilities are like in a sales process, and a time about you demonstrated leadership. So some of these things that are attributes that we bring in here will be very specific to the role, so you can substitute leadership for whatever the skill is needed for the role. Now we're going to look at your credentials and your experience through your qualifications. What's your highest level of education? What certifications do you hold? Training you've had? The type of products that you've worked with before, or services that you've been engaged in. Basically what we're trying to do is explain to our potential employer that not only do we have the ability, but we're well qualified for the role as well. Now, you don't have to be 100% fully qualified for the role. The company will have its own training. You're not going to know their products in backwards and forwards like you need to when you're there. So some of this stuff you don't have to worry so much about. But you just need to demonstrate you have a really strong base level of skills. You're able to learn quickly and communicate effectively. Other questions are going to be about predicting behavior. So we've talked about this before. Your past experience in context is the best evidence that we have of your future performance. So we're going to be asking questions here, and they're typically called behavioral interview questions, in order to understand how you approach challenges on the job. So these questions are going to be like, tell me about a time you achieved a personal goal. Recall a time when you didn't reach a goal. Tell me about a time. Tell me about a situation. Those are going to be the starter phrases that will be used for these questions. The next category is basically to determine how well you know the company and products and the role and how you might fit into the organization. This is going to be where you're really going to show the depth and quality of your research. So they're going to talk to you about what the biggest issue is in the industry or their company, the tools you use to diagnose problems and complete tasks, the knowledge you need to perform the responsibilities of the role. We're going to be testing you here. Do you understand the role and its requirements? Do you understand the role and its fit in the organization? Do you know who your stakeholders are in the business? How does your role fit into the overall success of the organization? Those are going to be the things that we want you to demonstrate as you're going through this. The final category are wildcard questions or brain teasers. These are usually asked to see how you think on the fly or analyze abstract problems. Some people call these stupid interview questions. These are really questions to kind of throw you off. Really what we're looking for is how you handle a difficult situation when you're put on the spot and what's your thought process. I really don't want to know how many ping pong balls would fit in a car. I want to know how you would go about figuring that out. So this is one of those questions where it's designed to throw you off. Your best bet is to take a deep breath, think, ask for a moment to ponder your answer, and then just think through logically and talk it out sometimes. Well, you know what? That's a interesting question. If ping pong balls, how many ping pong balls could fit in a car? I'd probably start with how many ping pong balls would fit in a square, in a square foot or a cubic foot, and then figure out how much space is in the car. And then simply do simple math, and I'm sure I'd be pretty close. So those kinds of, that kind of simple answer, again, it's not to say 315. You could also be smarmy and say, well, it depends on what kind of car, right? That's not the point. So think about the intent and make sure you answer it in an appropriate way. But Arthur, I don't have any experience. How can I answer some of these questions? Well, One of the most stressful parts of the interviewing sessions for students is this perception of lack of experience. In many cases, it's absolutely not true, though. It's just that you don't have the experiences that you can connect well to the job you're seeking because you're thinking to yourself, I've never done this job before. How can I do it? And particularly if you don't have internship experience. But remember, it's all relative to your competition for the role. And if you're in the interview process, that means you're qualified. So get over that. Just get over it. Know that you're qualified. You're there because you deserve to be there. That's the thing you need to remember. And it's all relative to the competition, like I said. Here, it's not about your qualifications separating you from the pack. It's your likability, it's your energy, your enthusiasm, and it's your ability to connect the dots for them that they can see you successful in the role you're interviewing for. So even if you don't have a lot of work experience, we know this. Hiring managers know this. Understanding that you still have experiences that are very relevant is an important thing to realize, and your ability to capture that, understand it, and then speak to how your transferable skills can meet their expectations are extremely important. So some examples of that might be when we say, the job requires your skills to deal with conflict. Talk about dealing with a difficult team member in a project or group situation, like in your class, your fraternity. Dealing with a difficult customer in your part-time waiter job. Time management. Talk about working 20 to 25 hours per week while maintaining a 3.7 GPA. Leadership. Talk about taking on the vice president role in your fraternity, taking on the president's position in your social organization, or taking a leadership position in a club or organization on campus. And then you could talk about project management. You could talk about how you led a fundraising event to raise money for a charity or a cause for your fraternity. These things are transferable. Most of the skills you have, particularly the soft skills, are transferable. Remember that and make sure you try to capture that essence and being able to explain that well in the interview. That's the key skill. You have the skills. The job is here communicating how those skills can translate to success in the business. So ultimately, it comes down to these two things. Are you likable? And then can you connect the dots for them to be able to share that information that I just said? That your skills and abilities, coupled with your personality and your other interpersonal skills and soft skills, make you a great fit for the organization. Now let's talk about answering those pesky interview questions in the right way. So ultimately, the best interview responses are surrounded through great storytelling. And one of the ways that you can create your stories is using the CAR method. Now, you may have heard the STAR method. The CAR method is pretty much the same thing. It's just a variation of that where perhaps we've combined the S and the T into the C category. So the CAR is a challenge, action, and result story arc. Okay? And you can remember ARC as well. ARC is a variation of CAR. Here, we want to make sure that we describe the situation that we had, what had to be done, and perhaps what the consequences are if we didn't do it. Next, we talk about what our actions are. How did we plan? How did we approach the actions that we identified that are important? What did we do if we found maybe those actions were incorrect? We have to discuss the possibilities and how we came upon the actions that we decided upon. And then we talk about our results. And the more that we can quantify those results in terms of numbers, the better. But ultimately, that's not the important part. Just as we talked about in your bullets, the results are important, but understanding how the impact of those results have an impact on the organization. That's the key thing. Now let's talk about how that can come together. So we'll use an example question of describe a time when you had to act quickly to solve a problem. And this is a good example of a potential answer that you could use for somebody that works in food service. So the situation, what's the challenge? I worked as a restaurant server, and at the beginning of what would have been a really slow shift, there were power outages all around town. Word spread that we were open, and before long, we had a line into the parking lot. And you know what? We were not staffed for a busy night, and the manager needed help in the kitchen. So what actions did we take? The manager asked me to start handling things at the front. I needed to begin acting as the host while still pitching in to help with serving and bussing, and it was a really stressful situation. First, I thought of a way to open more tables, and I assigned myself to an area to bus while managing the arrivals at the same time. I pulled the other servers and bussers together to share a plan and made sure I wasn't missing anything from their perspective. And then next, I ensured that we thanked the customers for their patience, and I always gave them an update on the wait time. I continued checking in with them and with the manager and the other staff while monitoring seating and communicating with customers. And you know what? By the end of the night, we had tripled our typical Tuesday night business with 0 complaints and reasonable wait time given the circumstances, of course. Customers thanked us as they were leaving for working hard and to accommodate more people during a pretty stressful time, and the manager was extremely pleased. Thinking about another one, and I'm not going to read this one, I'll just leave this for you to kind of take a look at here in the video. And tell me about a time when you had to manage a difficult project, and we're going to go through the same arc, talking about the challenge, our actions, and then ultimately what the result was. So this is a great framework for how to deal with interview questions, making sure you're already ready to think about the stories, and knowing what those interview questions could be is a great cocktail for being really prepared. And what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to talk about some typical questions that you'll run into during the interview process and how to think about answering them. We'll cover what the intent of the question is and how you can approach with a good answer. That's the end of this video. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.